morning. On the behalf of the ISO, I'd like to welcome you to the 2023 Flexible Capacity Needs and Availability Assessment Methodology Process meeting. My name is Alessandra Casillas, representing the Stakeholder Engagement Group here at the California ISO, and I will be facilitating today's meeting, where I'm also joined by Clyde Lutan, Principal of Renewable Energy Integration, as well as Hong Zhu from the Market Development and Analysis Lead. And finally, with Jessica Tahari, the energy meteorologist here at the ISO. The presentation and other materials related can be found on the process webpage. And just some housekeeping reminders, this call is being recorded and the video file will be posted on the initiative webpage for information and convenience purposes only. The recordings and any related transcription should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. This meeting is structured to stimulate dialogue and engage different perspectives, and please keep comments professional and respectful. Also, please try and be brief and refrain from repeating what has already been said so that we can manage the time efficiently. Instructions for raising hands. We will pause for questions periodically throughout the meeting, where you can raise your hand by selecting the hand icon above the chat window in WebEx, or if you've joined via audio only, please press pound 2 on your device. Please remember to state your name and affiliation first. And if you need any technical assistance during today's meeting, please send a chat to the event producer. Please remember to state your name and affiliation first before making your comments. And you may also send your question via chat to all panelists. Next slide, please. Thank you. The purpose of today's call is to discuss the criteria, methodology, and assumptions used in calculating monthly flexible capacity requirements, and to calculate requirements for all LRAs within the ISO footprint for RA compliance year 2023, and advisory flexible capacity requirements for compliance years 2024 and 2025, and finally to discuss the input assumptions and methodology of the annual CAISO's Availability Assessment Hour, AAH. Next slide, please. And for today's agenda, after I'm finished with the introduction and background, I'll turn it over to Clyde Lutan, who will discuss the process review on expected build-out from all LSCs, CPUC jurisdictional and non-jurisdictional, and just the actual load, wind, and solar 1-minute profiles for 2021 and expected profiles for 2023 through 2025, and calculate 3-hour net load ramp, expected monthly maximum contingency reserve requirements, calculate monthly flexible capacity requirements, allocation methodology, availability assessment hours, and then finally I'll go over the next steps at the end of this meeting. Reminder for questions, you can raise your hand by selecting the hand icon above the chat window in WebEx, or if you joined via audio, if you've joined via audio only, press pound 2 on your device. Please remember to state your name and affiliation first. And from here, I'll turn it over to Clyde Lutan.
Thank you. Can you forward to slide 4? So we have been doing this for a while now, and for those that are new to the process, resource adequacy is something that we look at, we do every year on a monthly basis. And as we started to integrate more and more renewables, we determined that resource adequacy had a requirement built into it, and that was flexible capacity. So each year now, what we do is we calculate the flexible capacity needs by month that's embedded in resource adequacy. And the objective here is for scheduling coordinators to ensure, that load serving entities under their purview do a year ahead and a month ahead showing for flexible capacity. And what we really do is, I'm not getting into how we do this calculation, but year ahead, the scheduling coordinator needs to make sure that load-serving entities secure a minimum of 90% of the following year flexible capacity needs. Month ahead, that bumps up to 100%, and all resources participating in the ISO market, with a contract, must offer, they follow the must offer obligation rules. And then the requirement to submit economic bids in the ISO real-time market is consistent with whatever category the resource qualified for flexible capacity. So with that, can you advance one more slide? So the ISO flexible capacity assessment is based on a few things. So we start off with sending out a survey every December to all the load-serving entities. They send that back to us by January 15th. And what it is we ask for is the renewable build-out within their LLC's portfolio. So we look at things like wind, solar, is it fixed? Is it dynamically scheduled? If it's dynamically scheduled, things we wanted to know is, how does it really come into the ISO, right? And by that I mean it's either a static schedule or a dynamic schedule. We include the dynamic schedules into the flexible capacity analysis because by definition, dynamically scheduled renewables, the ISO is responsible for not only meeting the minute-by-minute variability of the VERS located outside the ISO, but especially for solar, when that drops off during sunset, the ISO needs to make up that lost generation. So it's really important that we get a good handle as to what the renewables build-out is. And for this year, the binding year that we will be studying is 2023. We will provide advisory 3-hour ramps and flexible capacity needs for 2024 and 2025. So what we do is we start off with, as I said, the load profiles, and we use the CC 1 and 2 IPA forecast, and then we look at the solar, we try to develop solar profiles for 23 through 25, and we do the same thing for wind profiles. I'll get into that a little more as we move along, and that's what we publish. So on slide 6 is so slide 6 is the IPA forecast. So the CPC, they do a pretty detailed job in calculating the hourly demand. So we have here the CC IPA forecast link that we will be using for this flexible capacity study. And if you can advance one more slide, it goes into a little more detail. So we start off by using column U. One more slide, please. So similarly, so what we do, this is going into a little more detail. So when you log on to the CC's website, the very first file that shows up is the 2021 hourly forecast. And we use the coincident, the Cal ISO's mid-baseline, with the AAEE scenario 3 and the AAFS scenario 3, which is just, the additional achievement on energy efficiency and the additional achievement of fuel substitution. So to get that, we start off with the base net load, which is column T. So the CC does all of this calculation. They look at behind the meter PV. They look at storage. They look at residential, non-residential storage. And then before they come up to column D, they start off with a baseline consumption, which is column N. And curtailment has a lot of different things. It takes into consideration things like electric vehicle production that the CC determine, when that's going to happen. The time of use rate impact on the baseline consumption is also included in that. But what we use, we also use for determining the flexible capacity needs is column U, which is the last column in that spreadsheet, and it's the managed net load, the net load. Now, there's a little difference. You may hear me talk about net load. So this managed net load from the CEC is really demand. And that's what's shown in slide 7 here when we talk from the ISO. When we look at net load, the name is the same, but net load is really load minus wind minus solar, so from the grid perspective. So slide 8. So on slide 8, what we do is we take the CC hourly forecast. So the CC, they do, as I said, a detailed job. They have an hourly forecast, so not an hourly, a monthly forecast, and then they further break that monthly forecast into hourly forecasts for the whole month. So then what we do is we take the most recent data of actual load data that we experience in the grid. And if you look at that, the blue curve, this is a representation of what it is we do. So the blue represents, let's say, the CEC's hourly forecast. And then that smooth green curve is the ISO's actual load demand. This is the gross load demand that we experience in the grid. Now, the second thing, well, the step 1 is what we do is we convert that minute by minute load into hourly. So we take the hourly average of those minute by minute actual data points, and we end up with an hourly profile. We compare that to the CC's forecast, and one point to dwell on here is our actual never exceeds the CC's peak demand for that month. So first thing we do, if you look at that purple line, is we look at the difference between the CC's forecast and the ISO's actual hourly demand for each hour in that month. And that purple curve is the difference. Second thing that we do within the ISO is we take that purple curve, and if you blow up, the y-axis, the purple line, you see how it really looks. It's really, it could be big in some hours, both positive and negative. And then what we also do within the ISO is we run a smoothing routine. So we try to smoothen out that hourly deviation, which is the purple line, and we end up with this orange smooth curve minute by minute, which, on the next slide will show up as X. So then we take that, the ISO's minute by minute profile, we add this X, which is the smoothing to kind of smoothen out the CEC's hourly forecast. And that's the process of smoothing the load. And then if we can advance to slide 9, I'll pause there for a second and then see if there are any questions out there as to how we end up with or use the CEC's load forecast to develop the ISO's load forecast. So, yeah. So this is just a mathematical representation of what was discussed in slide 8. So for example, in 2023, we look at 2021, and the X is the minute by minute variability between 21 and 23. So are there any questions out there as to how we deal with the load forecast?
It looks like we have one question in the chat.
Okay.
The question is from, let's see, CEC, and the question is this minute-by-minute process still the PMNL developed method, and is the method proprietary?
So I missed the first part of that question. Could you please repeat it?
Absolutely. The question is this minute-by-minute process still the PMNL developed method, and is the method proprietary?
I don't think it is proprietary. It's a software package that we use, and I can have either Hong or Jessica chime in. Those are the ones that do this actual smoothing, and they would know for sure if this software is proprietary or not. Hong or Jessica?
This is Hong, and we don't know. The ISO does not know PMNL was that 1 minute thing. From the aggregate time series to say for a season, a year, to expand it to from year to a season, from season to a month, from month to a day, is really established statistical procedure. There is nothing really proprietary in that sense. It's just available all the places, available since the very beginning of doing this time series analysis. I don't think it will be involved like that. My training is a statistician. I know it's in my graduate study or undergraduate study, we have these kind of standard procedures. So in short, so it's not, to me, it's not proprietary. I don't know what they applied for. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Are there any more questions? Susanna?
Currently, no other questions in the queue.
Okay, so if we advance to slide 10, slide 10 is how we grow the wind. So when we send out forecast, the LSCs submit the wind and solar contracts and whatever it is they think is going to be in their portfolio. We take that data and we break that down by capacity. So each month we know exactly what the capacity, well, not exactly, but what the forecasted capacity is going to be, let's say for wind, in each month in 2022 through 2025. So we use the actual 2021 capacity, so we can do a scaling. Now, if you look at the first sub-bullet, we says wind actual data utilized, it includes the dynamic resources. So for those of you familiar with how the ISO calculates load in real time, is we sum the internal generation and then we look at the interchange. And together those two makes the ISO's demand. And the dynamic schedules includes, external wind and solar, so that comes in. And the way that dynamic schedule is created, we being the ISO actually see, as I said, all the variability associated with wind and solar resources that's located outside the balancing authority. So in other words, we are responsible for all the flexible capacity needs for those external dynamic resources. So what we also do is for any wind plants that came in, let's say in April or May or any month, we also incorporate that when we do the scaling for the following year. So for the first, let's say it came in May, for the first 5 months, it may not be included or it would not be included in the production. So, but we do account for that when we do the scaling. And the scaling is pretty straightforward. Now, when we had started off doing this flexible capacity needs, we had data or wind data built for us by NREL. But as more and more wind plants came on to the line, to the system, we found out now that we can simply do a scaling, and it's close, to having or doing a detailed study, and then the uncertainty. But trying to predict, let's say you have a wind plant that's going to be built in some part of the system, you got to, you need to have like a third party, like an NREL, trying to figure out what the wind speed and everything else associated with that location to determine what the production is going to be 2 years from now. So what we do is, since we have over 6,000 megawatts of wind on the system, we could simply do a scale based on capacity and, just to account for the increased capacity that we'd expect in wind in 23, 24, and 25. So in terms of the wind growth, this is the methodology we use. We have been using this for quite a number of years. I would pause there for a second to see if anyone has a question on the wind growth assumptions that we make.
Hi, Clyde. We have one question in the chat.
Okay.
This question is from Pedro Sanchez. The question is, are you only assuming summer peaking profile for the wind generation?
No, actually, we look at the wind every minute, the profile every minute for 2021. So it's over 525,000 data points. And then we break that out by month. So it's a detailed analysis going back to slide 7 and 8. Well, that was the load, but we do something similar, calculating the minute-by-minute wind profiles, but we do the scaling based on the monthly capacity. Was that clear?
Yes, that is clear. Thank you, Clyde. No further questions.
All right, so if we could advance one more slide. We do something similar for the solar profiles. So again, we start off with the most recent actual 1 minute data, which again, in this case is 2021. Similar to the wind, we include the dynamic resources. We also calculate the expected monthly capacity, and then we know what the capacity was by month, like for 2021, so we can do that scaling. And then again, what we do is we take each minute of each month, and then we do that scaling based on capacity. So minute by minute profiles for the whole month, and each one of those minutes would be scaled based on the anticipated capacity of solar divided by the capacity of the actual 2021 solar profile. So it's similar to what we do with wind. And can we advance to one more slide, and then I'll pause there for a second? Okay, so any questions on the solar build out? Okay, assuming no questions there. So the next thing we do is, so we build the load profile. We do the same thing. We build out the wind profile and the solar profile, and then we calculate the net load. A net load is a NERC accepted matrix where net load by definition is load minus wind minus solar. Because in the old days, balancing authorities dispatched to meet load. Today, more or less, wind and load, unless you have congestion or unless you have oversupply, we treat wind and solar as must take. And by that, we dispatch generation to meet net load. So the net load is more variable. And this is something that, we notice, we calculate, we see based on historical data. Net load is more variable than load by itself, wind by itself, and solar by itself. So when you do this combination, this is why we end up looking at net load to see what that net load variability is. So the end goal here is to come up with the monthly maximum 3-hour flexible capacity needs. So we look at every hour, every 3 hours, consecutive hours in that month, and we try to pick the max 3-hour ramp. Now, we don't just pick the maximum 3-hour ramp. We go back and we look at those numbers. So, for instance, if you see the 3-hour ramp is 15,000 megawatts, we look at the second highest 3-hour ramp, and if that's pretty close to 15,000, we would determine that that first number is a pretty good number. But if you see the second number or the second highest is, a few thousand megawatts lower, something's wrong with that maximum peak. So we do not just pick the maximum peak. We use a little heuristics to calculate the true or expected peak that we expect to see. And that's how we end up with the 3-hour ramp. Now, as I said, we dispatch flexible capacity to meet that net load. And if we can advance one more slide. So on this slide, based on actual 2021 data, I just picked 7 random days in March 2021. And the intent here is to show what we try to do by projecting out, let's say, for 2023. So you can see how different the net load is from one day to the next. And in 1 month, you can have a lot of variability, both in the horizontal axis and the vertical axis. So this is a challenge for us in real time for forecasters to determine what that net load is, because you got 4 big variables in the system now. You got load, you got wind, you got solar, and you got rooftop PV. And you got to project that out, the actual production by hour. And that's not a simple thing to do, and as you can see, when just 7 days here, trying to pick the max, it's not an easy task, right? So that's one thing, the 3-hour ramp. But then also the system operators, all those little squiggles that you see minute by minute, we need to make sure we have flexibility intra-hour to balance all of those, right? So the focus of this study is really meeting the maximum 3-hour ramp. But the secondary, we also need to balance supply and demand. We got to do this on a minute-by-minute basis, right? So one more slide, and then I'll pause for questions on slide 14. Slide 14 showed over the past few years, from 2018 through 21, the actual 3-hour ramp that we experienced. So when you look at this, you can see it's increasing, but we had 2 abnormal years in there, 2020, 2021. With COVID, things didn't really follow a nice progression, but still you can look at the blue, which is the actual that we experienced in 2021, and you can see an increase in the 3-hour actual net load ramp compared to the previous years. With that, I'll pause for a second, see if there are any questions out there.
Hi, Clyde. We actually do have one question in the chat.
Okay.
This question is from James Mearns. And the question is, has the NERC methodology been updated in light of more recent experience, example, Blue Cut Fire or Odessa events in 2021?
So things like the Blue Cut Fire or contingencies on the system, they would not impact the 3-hour ramps, because one of the things we also do when we look at the net load, we look at the variability, the net load variability, and sometimes we go down to the minute-by-minute variability. So, for instance, if we have a contingency on the system, you would see, let's say we lose 1,000 megawatt unit, we would see net load drop by 1,000 megawatts. So we would exclude that from the actual 3-hour ramp. So contingencies on the system, abnormal operating conditions, we would exclude things like that. And we try as best as we could to base the 3-hour ramp on normal experiences, that we observe on the system. So just to reiterate what I said, any abnormal system operating conditions, we try to weed out when we create these 3-hour ramps. Any more questions?
No further questions.
Okay, so if we move on to slide 15. Slide 15 shows what we had forecasted in 2020 for 2021. And when we did that forecast, the actual data that we used was 2019. And if you remember, 2019 was normal in the sense that COVID really struck in 2020, 2021. So looking at the forecast against the actuals, it may seem that we had over forecasted, but then when you look at slide 16, which shows if we had incorporated the curtailment, can you advance one more slide? If you look at the curtailment, so when we do this forecast, it's really difficult to determine when we're going to be curtailing renewables. So renewables, a lot of things can happen. It depends on the demand on the system. It depends on the renewable production. So can you please advance to slide 16? So what we do is we go back and we look at the actual curtailment each hour for like 2021. One more slide, please. Yeah, so the green is really taking the previous slide, the slide 15, and incorporating or adding back the actual curtailment that the votes that we curtailed each month. And when you do this adding back, you can see the true 3-hour ramp that we would have experienced was not too far off from the forecast. And February is a good example. Our maximum 3-hour ramp so far is 17,259 megawatts, which is a lot of megawatts, to move in 3 hours. And one more slide, and we can pause for any questions. So slide 17. So slide 17 shows you the months that we have maximum curtailment. So March, April, May. Sometimes we can even see that, into February, and it depends on the spring runoff. If it's early, if it's late, we can see that extend into June. But those are the months we see the highest curtailment. What we did here is we compare 2020 with 2021, and again, it's very subjective. As I said, it depends on a lot on your hydro condition. It depends on your wind and solar production. It depends on the low demand on the system, spring runoff. So all of that determines the curtailment on the system. And then when you look at this same plot on slide 18, it clearly shows that sunrise to sunset is when we see maximum or most curtailment. One more slide, please. So the curtailments here, looking at 2020 and 2021, is really centered around sunrise and sunset. So again, the y-axis is gigawatt hours, and these are the curtailments that or the actual curtailments on the system with the previous slide by month, on this slide by hour. I'm just going to pause that because I think I got like 2 or 3 more slides to go to see if there are any more questions out there.
looks like we have one individual in the queue. Operator, can you please open a line for Chris?
Hi, this is Chris Devon, Customized Energy Solutions. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, Chris. Hi.
Hi, Clyde. Thanks for the presentation. I'm just a little bit curious maybe to explore this a little bit better. Maybe I'm just not understanding the slides, but what have you guys decided to do with these curtailments in the actual process itself? Because it's not totally clear to me here from these slides. I know you've been talking about it for a couple of years now about, considering it, but now that you're considering it a little bit more thoroughly and you have a lot of the data, are you guys going to actually add that back in like you were kind of showing? I think, it seemed to be, you seem to be kind of inferring that if you add some of those curtailments back in, it would be inaccurate. So are we just going to continue to use kind of the standard process that we have been previously, or is there any other further discussion on this that might happen in the future, or anything that you could, maybe explain a little bit further for me to help understand would be appreciated. Thanks, Clyde.
So, Chris, that's a really good question, but it's a little more complicated than just looking at the curtailments, right? Because when we curtail, so what we do in calculating the 3-hour ramps is we look at what would that maximum 3-hour ramp be on the system. So if everything works right, then that is what we would actually experience, right? Now, in real time, we do other analyses. And one being, we do things like contingency reserve analysis in real time. We do things like, well, do we have enough rotated mass in the system? Do we have enough frequency response capability? Can we meet, other things in the system, right? So all of that would determine what that curtailment is going to be. The other unknown there is going to be like, well, hydro. And as well as a lot of folks in the call, right? Sometimes you can get ancillary services from hydro, and sometimes you cannot. And I've been here at the ISO, many years, and I've seen years where we had good hydro year with under hydro spill conditions, we couldn't even get ancillary services from hydro resources. So we ran short on things like ancillary services, right? So there's a lot of unknowns trying to predict when you're going to do this curtailment and how that's going to impact your ramp in real time. Now, the other thing too is I think, and I'm not sure, and probably Amber or somebody else might notice for sure, if load serving entities can, in order to meet some of, let's say, their ramping needs, if that curtailment could be added in. I'm not sure. I don't think so, but it's something that could be considered, in the future. Could we add, curtailments to meet part of your flexible capacity needs, to the system. And the other thing too is what we're thinking of is getting more and more renewables to participate in ancillary services. If that happens, it would change the dynamics as to what we could do with the curtailments. But for right now, we calculate the curtailments based on historical data to see, when it happens. But it's very, very difficult to know exactly which hour you're going to be doing this curtailment. But the other good news here is the curtailments that we see does not really happen during the 3-hour ramp. It happens during the middle of the day when you have an abundance of solar. So in a lot of these cases, except that if the curtailments carry through from, let's say, 3 o'clock into the start of that ramp during sunset, it doesn't really contribute a lot per se.
Yeah, and just to add, Clyde, thanks for that explanation, and hi, Chris, this is Amber. I mean, when you go back to, I think, slide 16, where we are running the comparison, I think it's important that we continue to watch the curtailments and the impact of the curtailments on the 3-hour ramp. Right now, we're not proposing a change to the methodology. We've been watching the impact of them on the 3-hour ramp. Going back to Clyde's previous slide, we use the actual solar data for 2021 to form the requirement with the capacity growth that's there, right? And within that actual data is the impact for curtailment. So if resources were curtailed during that period of time, it would be in the 1 minute data that's used to form the solar and wind profiles. So I think that that's important to note. The one thing that we keep watching is just to make sure, because it is within that data, is there something that we need to do to plan the system for that worst case scenario? And I think when you go back to the slide and you see the data of the actuals with and without curtailments, it shows right now we're okay, right? I don't think we have to do anything for that, so there's no recommended change, but it's something we definitely have to watch with the amount of renewable growth that's on the system.
Thanks, Amber. So,
thank you. Sorry, go ahead.
Chris, are you okay with that explanation?
Yeah, that's helpful. I just raised it because I had, seen for a couple of years now you guys talking about the curtailment data. I certainly understand the points you guys both made. I think, Amber's point is well taken about the fact that the actuals are incorporating those. And then, the other slide you presented is pretty helpful. And your point about the, solar curtailments during the net load peak period, not really actually, when we see those 3-hour ramps not really actually being that large. I think those things all seem to make a lot of sense to me. I was just a little bit more curious to get a little bit more color around that, and I think you guys have provided that. So thank you very much for that.
Thanks for the question. So slide 19. So the only other thing that we add on to the 3-hour flex capacity needs is a portion of the contingency reserve requirement. The reason why we do this, and we explained this, in the past, is even though you're into a 3-hour ramp and you're scrambling to meet the increase as solar drops off, if we do have a contingency during that 3-hour ramp, now 2 things we need to meet. One, we need to continue balancing supply and demand every minute. And then the second thing that kicks in is we need to recover let's say we lose 1,000 megawatts during that 3-hour ramp. We only got 15 minutes to recover that. And if we do not recover within 15 minutes, even though we're into a ramp, that could come with a hefty fine from NERC. And that fine could be as high as $1 million per occurrence, right? And on top of that, I had mentioned WEC pretty strict. WEC forces the balancing authority that fails the DCS to carry 3 months of excess reserve. So carrying 3 months of additional reserves is not a nice thing. So we want to make sure that we could cover that 3-hour ramp in addition to recover from a contingency if it happens in that ramp. So that's the reason why we include a portion of the contingency reserve in the flexible capacity requirement. And the last thing here is, I know folks say, well, if you're into a ramp, can you use contingency reserve to help you meet that ramp? And the answer is no. If we go into a stage emergency, we will use that contingency reserve to avoid dropping firm load. But other than that, under normal operating conditions, we cannot just use contingency reserve to mitigate a shortfall between, forecast and demand. So I think slide 20 might be my, can you advance to slide 20? So 20 is just the formula for what I just explained. The flexible capacity requirement, we look at the maximum 2-hour ramp each month, and then we look at the max most severe single contingency, or 3.5% of the expected peak demand. And then we had introduced that epsilon way back in 2014. We never really incorporated any changes or any additions to the flexible capacity needs. Today is just as what it was. We look at the maximum 3-hour ramp and a portion of the contingency reserve. Then I got 2 more slides, and then that's slide 21. So slide 21. Slide 21, we showed this just so that folks would understand what it is we're seeing right now on the system. So if you look at this really close, we took the 3-hour ramp, the actual 3-hour ramp that we saw in 2021, and then within that 3-hour ramp, we looked for the maximum 1-hour ramp. So this is not the absolute 1-hour ramp on the system, but this is the maximum 1-hour ramp within the maximum 3-hour ramp. And as you can see, except for July, almost every other month, and June is pretty close and August is pretty close, but the 1-hour ramp is almost 50% or more than the 3-hour ramp. So this really tells you that we need a lot more faster ramping resources on the system. Storage is a light at the end of the tunnel. But when you look at some of these months, like March and February, when 1 hour you got to ramp up, 9,000 megawatts. That's a lot of megawatts to move in 1 hour. And then it doesn't stop there because you still got 2 more hours to ramp. And as I said, in February, 17,000 megawatts. It's a lot of megawatts to move. And again, to put this in perspective, and I like to draw this example, SMUD peak demand is 2,500 megawatts. When you look at what the ISO tries to move in an hour, it's about 4 times SMUD peak demand in an hour. So that's a lot of megawatts. And ensuring that you have flexible capacity, it's something that we take, seriously. So my last slide is slide 22. I think before I pass this on to Hong, so on slide 22, this is going back to the data that we requested from the load 7 entities. We already got the CCI for forecast. We started to look through those, and as I said, column U is the column we're going to be using for the load forecast. We already collected all the data that we needed from the load 7 entities. We started going through that data. So far, everything that we looked at looked fine, but we only went through like about 10 to 15% of the submittal so far. So we're still going through that. The ones that we looked at, the information we asked for, they were included, like co-located, hybrid. I think the credit goes to the load 7 entities. They did a good job submitting the data request. I know it's something that a lot of folks don't like to do, but it's really important that we get this as accurate as we could because it impacts, the flexible capacity needs of the system. And with that, and this is not something that the ISO does in isolation. This is something, just FYI, the rest of the country started to adapt what the ISO is doing in terms of 3-hour ramps. So all BAs within North America today, they look at the 3-hour ramp needs on their system, even though they do not have a lot of solar. So they look at the ISO as an entity that they can learn from, only because we got so much solar and we got so much rooftop PV where we experienced huge ramps. And this may sound funny, but I had a call from my counterpart out in Duke, and he called me up and he said, look, we have 1,500 megawatts of solar. We started to see the ramps you guys talk about. Can I come out there and see the studies you guys did? And lo and behold, he flew out to the West just to look at the kind of analysis that we do, because a lot of entities, if you try to see what people experience in other parts of the U.S., they don't. We see it only because we have so much grid-connected solar and so much rooftop PV. It creates unique operating challenges for system operators. Hence, we try to get this flexible capacity study done as best as we could. And with that, unless there are any last-minute questions, I'll pass this on to Hong.
It looks like we don't have any questions in the queue or chat. As a reminder, for questions, you can raise your hand by selecting the hand icon above the chat window in WebEx, or if you've joined via audio only, press #2 on your device. Please remember to state your name and affiliation first, and you may also send your questions via chat to all panelists.
Okay. Thank you, Clive, for the presentation, and it explained well what the ISO 3-hour needs. Can you please go to next slide? This is Hong. So once we have this total ISO 3-hour ramp needs, then we need to do the allocation to each SC, so LSEs. So the next two slides have a little more notation, all the maybe a little more kind of simple mathematical formula, and it may be not familiar or maybe intimidating, but it's mechanical. It's kind of step by step. That's the beauty of the math formula. Okay, so I started this all the notation. You can stop me by raising a hand. And we have this load, wind, solar, net load. Net load, as Clive said before, in this setup is defined as load minus wind minus solar. This little triangle is the Greek letter is the delta. Delta is defined as ramp. So the ramp is defined, hey, the beginning of that hour generally is hour 16 or 15, 16, 17. The end is the end hour is 18, 19, 20. So generally it's in this pattern. So the third L, that means the load ramp, is during these 3 hours, what the load has, what the behavioral load. Load could be increased during that sharp solar goes down, could be increased, could be flat, could be little negative. And the delta wind, delta solar is the same. The delta net load is have the ramp between the subtraction of these different components. So since this 3-hour ramp, the flex study is for next year. So then we put a little subscript year in the ramp. So delta NL, that means the 2023, that means 2023 net load ramp. So then the allocation, the end result is delta L. I put a little SC, or we can put a LSE. Since SC has 2 letters, LSE has 3 letters, so I just use the SC as a simplified version. And so this is the allocation. That's the allocation each LSE or SC going to receive. So the question? Okay. Then this is the load ramp, and then we have another small, very small component is reserves. Reserves have the formula. So the next is the CC, peak load ratio. That is designed for really to how to allocate the reserve. Not the design, it's the used for the allocating the reserve. So the last symbol I'm going to introduce is the sigma, the big sigma. It's summation of all the allocation to the LSD. So when we do the big pie, when we chop it into small different pies to each LSD or SC, then we need the small piece of pie added up equal to big pie. So basically, any coefficient to do the allocation need have the summation equal to 1. So for instance, the CC peak load ratio, of course, the peak load ratio is the sum up to 1. So that will use this property to do all the allocations to have the property of summation equal to 1 to cut the big pie to small pie. Go to next slide. So now the flex requirement, given all these symbols, if you are not familiar, then we can kind of go along with it. So all the flex requirement equal to net load ramp plus the reserve for future year, for next year. So when we do this allocation, we do in the peel the awning fashion. Then we do the first how to allocate the reserve. As I said, all the reserve was allocated by the peak load ratio given to us by the CC. So then the summation of one each bit SC get their own piece of how much they need to prepare for the reserve portion. So then the remaining to be allocated is the net load. Net load has three components. Delta, the load and ramp, and the solar ramps. Then for the solar and the wind, fortunately we have a ratio summation equal to 1, which for solar, for instance, is we have the survey for data each year data from SCs. Then how much total solar build up for next year you have. So then when we sum up this, each and SCs together, then it will equal to the total solar together. So summation equal to 1, then we can allocate how much we estimated the solar ramp, then we can do this allocation. Then we can do the same for the wind. So load, since we don't have the load profile for next year, so we have to do the slightly different ways. We cannot really just doing this simple ratio of this. And then we go next slide. The ISO has been using this allocation of the load for a few years now, and this is there is a process of developed to this end to this formula. Before we have a simple one, then we have the property of summation equal to 1. Then we run into the new problem, which is when the net load reaches the maximum, the total load could be 0 or negative, which that means you cannot use the total ramp of load as the coefficient to do, because the total load ramp in the denominator could be negative, could be 0. When you have 0, then anything small amount of change will mess up the whole thing. So then we find a way out of this, and whether this is the best formula or not, but that's the best formula currently available. We evaluated different proposals and still believe that's the best. So the reason this is the best is we kind of split the total load in future years into two different parts, which is the first part is what the ramp we have of your load has observed in the 2021, and then the second part is the remaining of the 23, the difference between 2023 to ramp to the 2021. So by doing this split, we have the advantage because the majority of this allocation is based on what you means SC has done in the 2021. If you have big load ramp, that's contributing to the net load 3-hour ramp, then you will get more allocation. If you have a big negative, then you will have less allocation. And also generally the load ramp and total between years is 2023 has a big chunk in 2021. So we only need to find a ratio for small part of the difference between 2023 and 2021. So the ratio we found, the best ratio we found so far is using the middle point of the load ramp. So if the if you have beginning node between beginning node and end node of the 3-hour ramp time, then we use the middle load point for the total. Then we have the HSC, what their load behave in that 3-hour net load ramp. So in this, we successfully avoid the divided by zero issue, and we give the big credit or reward for whatever the SC has been doing in 3-hour net load ramp of the load behavior. So that may be controllable by the SC. So then we just need to do this small chunk of the allocation. So all in all, so for the load, each SC will receive the bottom line is, well, what you have showing in the actuals of 2021 and doing little allocation of the second piece, small piece of doing this middle load the ratio. So but sum of this is equal to 1, then we go back. We will then we do this allocation for the load. So we have sum up the allocation for load, wind, solar, reserve, then each SC going to receive the allocation to this. So we this is a reasonable approach. It's really the best. No, all the improvement can be done. Maybe not, and we appreciate if any suggestions and all those, and we can evaluate. Thank you. So the let me pause for the question. Thank you.
Hi, Hong. It looks like we have one question in the chat. This question is from Pedro Sanchez. Could you remind us why the peak load is multiplied by 3.5?
Come again, sorry.
Of course. The question is from Pedro. The question is from Pedro Sanchez, and the question is, could you remind us why the peak load is multiplied by 3.5?
Oh, that's go back to that to the question. Maybe slide has touched. Go back to one slide or two. Go back. So this 3.5 is the peak load ratio. That's the peak load of the ISO's peak load. So this is 3.5. No, this is not 3.5. This is 3.5%. That's the kind of spin reserve. Sorry, this should have a percent stand there. Thank you for the question. If that's the confusion, then I need that percent there. And then this is the maximum emergency reserve for the MSCs. And so is that answer your question? So this is 3.5%, not 3.5. Otherwise, it's too big.
Yes, thank you, Hong.
Yeah, any more questions?
No further questions at this time.
Okay, thank you. I finish the load portion. How to do load proportion of doing this allocation and all the allocation, the formula is complicated maybe, but it's mechanical. We do this each year. So go to next slide. One more topic is about the count for how to the renewables into the determining flexible needs. Then since the 3-hour net load ramp, mainly in recent years, since we have so many renewables, especially solar. So is the solar contribution or the renewable contribution to these three net load ramp is huge. The timing is coincides with the solar goes down. So all the resources we have been including so far is the wind and the solar resources. That's before 2020, and the co-located will be added in already added in 2021. So these two slides, this one, the next one is talking about the hybrid renewable, because the hybrid has a little unique feature. There are the storage and the solar or renewable is in one resource ID. So then the since the all the renewables will contribute to 3 net load ramp, so we are going to for next year, proposing 2022, we are going to including the component of hybrid resources will be included in the 3-hour net load assessment. So by including that, we need to balance it out to give the credit for the solar component of co-located and hybrid resources to counter the flexibility capacity. So it's kind of balance out. By doing this separation of renewable component and the storage component, and it gives the easier, straightforward, because you may have renewable component is 100, and your storage may be 100 megawatts, your storage may be 50 megawatts, and then we don't know how will it balance, but between this separation is very straightforward, very simple. So then the question is how we are going to give the co-located hybrid storage the EFC. So go to next slide. The EFC for the tariff for hybrid is the sum of all the EFCs for each component. Since the solar or renewable is generally the quote unquote the causing the trouble, then we need including these only give the EFC to the storage, pretty much is which can help to reduce or help in the 3-hour net load ramp. So the EFC for the storage is for the battery for storage is given, is provided as N2C, minimum of N2C minus P minimum of N2C of Pmax minus Pmin. The N2C Pmax part is for the discharge, and the Pmin is for charging, and they maybe can help to the discharging part is for sure we need the generation when the solar goes down. The charging part may be we raise the battery. That's the argument to put that in the formula. Then so this formula has been used for battery and also for battery component co-located. So the same formula will be used for the battery component in hybrid, but the input of these parameters of N2C Pmax is slightly different, because N2C Pmax Pmin for battery and the battery in co-located, they are in the ISO master file as well as in ISO the serial reliability group. But for hybrid, the source of the Pmax or Pmin will be coming into the phase 2B. We may have the record. So before that, we may go back to the generator to ask whether your component Pmax Pmin is. And they have been done in this way since. Then the N2C for the battery component is available. It's not available from the serial. is available from the ISO deliverability study. So that's the CERA is received into C for one NQC for the unit, for the hybrid unit. But if we go back to the deliverability study, we can find the NQC for the component. So that's any question? That ends my presentation. Is for the hybrid and the EFC in the same fashion, but the input are slightly different. The source of input is slightly different. So if no question, I will hand over to Jessica.
Hi, Hong. We actually have 2 individuals in the queue. Operator,
Yeah.
can you please open the line?
Thank you.
Operator, can you please open the line for Nuo Tong?
Hi, this is Noah Tong from Middle River Power. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. I think I understand the EFC formula that you have here on this slide, but I don't think I got an understanding of how you would affect the output of the hybrid resource on slide 26, in the sense that, if will you take into consideration the charging aspect of the hybrid resource to essentially lower the generation profile of the solar or wind resources as part of your study?
That's the formula we have been used. There is a discussion is how valid, how they should, how much credit we should give, since we don't have the really reach the conclusion. I don't really have the good answer right now for you to say how the charging is going to help that part. So you can submit the questions, we take it back, and we find the best answer for you.
Yeah, let me expand a little bit. So if you go back to the previous slide on slide 26, this is Amber. There's 2 pieces, right? So the piece of the puzzle is we are incorporating the renewable component into the assessment of the 3-hour requirement. The second piece, which was the last bullet point on slide 26, shows that the battery resource is getting an EFC credit for the charge. So based on the formula that you have above in slide 27, you see that it's the NQC and the Pmax to the Pmin. So if the Pmin of the battery component of the hybrid resource is negative 250 and the Pmax is 250, but the NQC is 200, that resource is going to get the EFC credit from negative 250 to 200. And that NQC number for the hybrid battery component is coming from the ISO's deliverability study. I hope that helped. So the battery is getting credit. It's getting credit in the EFC, and then the requirement is going to grow if there was solar underneath the same hybrid based off of the solar contribution of its component level details.
So this, let me know if this is correct or if I heard this correctly. Essentially, you're saying that you will model the solar portion or the renewable portion of the hybrid as if it's not a hybrid, and you will allow the battery portion to have greater EFC value than it normally would if it's a standalone?
No. So it is using the same formula as a standalone, but we're getting component level details. So the hybrid resource, say the hybrid resource as a whole is 500 megawatts. The battery resource that's underneath that hybrid is 200. we're only looking at the Pmax of the battery of the hybrid at 200, the Pmin of the battery resource, and then the NQC of the battery. So it's getting the same treatment that a standalone battery would get, just looking at all of the component details underneath that hybrid.
Thanks. I'm wondering whether or not there is a tariff limitation on essentially doubling up on the battery's EFC to be greater than the Pmax or the NQC value.
Yeah, so there's two sections in the tariff. The tariff language that's above in this slide on the 27 right now is what went live December 15th of 2021 within the hybrid initiative of how to evaluate hybrid resources EFC values. There's another section that's already active within the tariff that talks about how to evaluate EFC for energy storage. I'd encourage you to look at that particular section within the tariff because that is detailed within section 4010 as well.
Thanks. So maybe the simpler question then is in here, the battery under the 500 megawatt example, or sorry, the 500 megawatt hybrid example, 200 megawatt battery example, the EFC would equate to 400 megawatts, assuming it's a negative 200 and positive 200 output. And then you would model the solar as a 500 megawatt resource in itself, as opposed to limiting the EFC of a battery from 0 because it's not charging from the grid, and therefore it would reduce the modeled solar from 500 down to 300 and have the EFC to be at 200. Is that correct?
I didn't follow the example all the way through. I think parts of it are correct and parts of it may be misstated. So remember that the NQC at the component level is going to limit that resource. You're also going to have an NQC at the hybrid level that will limit the resource in relation to deliverability. So we would look at the Pmax and the Pmin and then choose the less of the NQC versus the Pmax that is associated with the resource.
Yeah, but aren't you limiting it only to the Pmax portion of the battery and not the NQC, whereas the NQC of the hybrid is greater than the Pmax of the battery?
So the NQC for the battery component is a value that we have on deliverability at the battery component level.
For a hybrid? Or
so for a hybrid resource, we get,
go ahead.
So for a hybrid resource, we get 3 NQC values. We get an NQC value at the resource ID level. That's the one that's in CERA. And then we will get an NQC for the battery component that contributes to the hybrid as well.
Gotcha. I don't think that component level NQC is not public, right?
It's within the ISO's deliverability study, and that's something that we wanted to highlight in the conversation today to point everybody to know that that's the NQC value that we are going to be using to evaluate the hybrid resource battery component.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Hi, this is Chris Evans, Customized Energy Solutions. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks. Just following up on that last discussion, and then I have a separate point that's related to the hybrid part of this discussion as well. Are those aspects of the battery component NQCs in the deliverability study actually going to be made public? I wasn't quite clear on that, or is that just a ISO internal data point?
We can take that one, Chris. This is Amber. We can take that one back. I'd have to check to make sure if they're public or not public, and if they would be made public. but we'll take that back with us.
Okay, I think it might be helpful for people to help model some of these things and see if, there might be a different way of looking at how these hybrid resources could be impacting the flex needs. And I think this is a good discussion to be having. So I thank you guys for thinking about it. And I hit on this previously last year, I think, on the same topic. So I see you guys are moving forward. I guess, I would say I certainly understand the way that the CAISO has been thinking about this. It seems to be perhaps a little bit conservative in my opinion on the hybrid resources in particular. I think you have, maybe hit the right mark on the co-located resources because they are operated separately and participate in the market separately and are optimized at the overall market level. But the hybrid resources are optimized on their own, by their bids based as a dispatchable resource. So I think you may be missing the mark a little bit on leveraging the ability of, these hybrid renewable storage facilities to actually provide some of those grid services that, Clyde and everyone always talks about at CAISO. As far as things like, for example, the wind resources in particular, like if there was a wind hybrid, and it could decide to follow a dispatch down, for providing some flexibility needs. I think just only using the battery component for its EFC might be limiting it a little bit. Obviously, I can see the other side of the picture as well, and the conservative nature. I think that we're kind of looking at right now, maybe makes sense for the start, but I think we might be, not really incentivizing the full use of these resources. And I think they could provide more value if we had maybe a little bit different approach here. And then, I certainly understand the idea of, counting the renewables towards the flex needs and then giving the battery component the EFC credit and kind of the impact there. But I just think that, there's a chance that we're maybe missing the benefits that we could be capturing from these resources, in the sense that the resources might actually really not be contributing towards those 3-hour ramps if they're actually just charging up the batteries on site and they're already providing that flex need, through the battery component, and the LSCs that have procured those resources are kind of, moving in the right direction as far as creating resources that can provide those grid services and flexibility that CAISO needs. And so I just wanted to, throw that out there. Obviously, I think you guys have, decided on an approach right now that you're going to go forward with. But, I think more discussion on Flex RA is, upcoming, and maybe these things need to be discussed a little bit more thoroughly with the stakeholder community. And I'll wrap it up with that. Thanks.
So I just want to answer with a couple things. Remember we were going back to Clyde's part of the presentation where we talk about how the 1-minute actual data forms the requirement. So just the same for those hybrid resources, we have megawatt output at the component level of the solar resource. We have megawatt output at the component level of the wind resource. Those component level actuals are going to be formulated into forming the 3-hour requirement. So if there is, some impact of the hybrid at the megawatt output of the renewable source, it would be within the 1-minute actuals that form the requirement. So just one component to add. And then I just would, thank you for your comments. We appreciate this is a new paradigm. We think that there's benefits on both sides, and that the co-located resources and hybrid resources are new to the system with new data that's coming onto the system as well. And if you could just provide your comments in written form during the comment period, that would be really helpful.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that, Amber. And, I just follow up one more time just to say, I hear you with the actuals and I think the idea of the co-located resources particularly is appropriate here, but the hybrids being fully dispatchable and trying to optimize those underlying components. I hear your point about how those underlying components are actually using the data from those resources, but I'm just saying that if they're following a dispatch from the ISO, from the market for economic dispatch, they can curtail the resource and actually take that and charge the battery component, and then there really is no impact to the 3-hour net load ramp during that period from that particular resource. So that's the point I'm trying to get at, and I think that might need a little bit more discussion. But I think that's probably good for later points. So, we can certainly talk about this offline and provide some comments. So thanks for your consideration.
Thanks.
Thank you. There are no further questions in the chat or individuals in the queue.
All right, this is Jessica Tahiri, and I will be taking over the next couple of slides to go over the availability assessment hours. Could move 2 slides forward, please. Yeah, awesome, thank you. So quickly going over the methodology for our availability assessment hours. This methodology has remained the same as it has been the past few years, so no changes for the methodology here. We use the CEC IPER data described in previous slides, which is what Clyde went over on slide 7, the managed net load data, to obtain an hourly average load by hour by month for years 2021 through 2025. And then we use that managed net load data from the CEC to calculate the top 5% of load hours within each month using an hourly load distribution. And then we publish the available assessment hours for the years 2023 through 2025. And then those will be discussed in the stakeholder call we've got coming up later in April, and then eventually published in the BPM. And we can move on to the next slide. So information that we've already requested and obtained, as Clyde mentioned, we had a market notice go out for the survey data that was required in mid-December, and then all of the LSCs submitted their surveys by January 15th of 2022. So we have all of the surveys and starting to go through that data to continue the FlexRA process. And then the CEC IPER forecast, it was published and released last week. So now that we've got that, we can continue to move forward on the FlexRA and AAH process to continue to grab the results on that. And next slide, I believe this passes it back to Alessandra to go over upcoming steps.
Thank you, Jessica. The next step in this process is the February 16th comments deadline. The comment template will be posted by end of day today. Following with that, we'll have a stakeholder call on April 6th to discuss the preliminary flexible capacity and availability assessment hours requirements for 2022, 2023, and 2024. Please note we are evaluating our FlexRA schedule based on delay of CEC IPER forecast publication. At this time, we are expecting a 2-week delay. The above information is subject to change accordingly. Then sometime in April, we will publish a preliminary flexible capacity and AAH requirements for 2023, 2024, and 2025, along with accepting comments. And in May, we will issue a final flexible capacity and AAH requirements for 2023 and projected requirements for 2024 and 2025. Next slide, please. Any final questions? There are no questions in the chat and no individuals in the queue. Thank you for joining today's discussion. As a reminder, this meeting was recorded for informational and convenience purposes only. The video file will be posted on the process webpage for a limited time after this meeting. Before we close today's call, I want to bring to your attention to the publishing of the California ISO's first ever 20-year transmission outlook document. This document outlines long-term infrastructure needs to help enable and accelerate the integration of the new renewable resources onto the grid. You can find it by going to the California ISO website and click on the Planning and the Transmission Planning webpage. You will also see that we posted the 2021-2022 transmission plan. A meeting will be held on both of these topics on Monday, February 7th. Please see the ISO calendar for conference details. Again, thank you for joining today's discussion. We look forward to receiving your comments on today's discussion by end of day February 16th, and have a great rest of your day.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using Event Services. You may now disconnect.